It all started with a whisper, not from a palace insider or an investigative journalist, but from a woman whose name was never supposed to be known. A woman who had signed documents, sworn oaths of silence, and promised anonymity in exchange for a secure life and a quiet exit. But something changed. Something cracked. That woman, allegedly the surrogate of one of the most talked-about royal children in modern history, didn't just break her silence, she shattered it. And what she revealed could be the most explosive royal secret since the abdication crisis. One sentence, 7 words, barely above a whisper. Prince Harry's DNA test came back inconclusive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Those words didn't just echo in private circles, they exploded. Behind the velvet curtains of Montecito's luxury estates and the dimly lit corridors of royal staffers' homes across the pond, phones buzzed, heads turned, and pulses quickened. This wasn't a typical gossip headline. This wasn't another unfounded rumor about Meghan Markle's wardrobe or Prince Harry's body language. This was different. This time, the story had stakes. Deep, personal, and irreversible. Before we go any further, ask yourself this. What would happen if a man who gave up everything for love, his title, his homeland, even his military honors, discovered that the one thread still holding his world together might not be his at all? What would it do to a father, to a husband, to a son who once stood second in line to the throne, now caught in a storm where bloodlines are blurred and trust is stretched thinner than ever? This story isn't just about Meghan and Harry. It's about power, identity, secrets, and the cost of silence. And it begins long before the surrogates whisper. For years, speculation swirled like smoke around the birth of the Sussex children, particularly their daughter, Lilibet Diana. The couple, now stationed in California and severed from the traditions and protocols of the British monarchy, had made it a point to be fiercely private. No hospital press lines. No postnatal photos outside Lindo Wing. No medical documentation released. They insisted their choices were about autonomy and protection, a wish to raise their family away from the spotlight that had once chewed them up. But privacy, especially royal privacy, doesn't live in a vacuum. When questions go unanswered long enough, people begin to answer them for you. The rumor mill didn't need much to get rolling. Eyewitness contradictions, delayed announcements, and absent visual confirmations fueled a quiet but persistent theory that a surrogate had been involved. The public didn't hear much about this theory in the mainstream press. Most outlets steered clear, afraid of being labeled invasive, conspiratorial, or worse, racist. But behind closed doors and online, the theory spread like wildfire. Meghan and Harry's refusal to confirm or deny only added gasoline. Then, just when the story began to fade into the background of more urgent headlines, the whisper came. Allegedly, the surrogate, a woman who had been handsomely compensated for her silence, had begun to feel the burden of what she knew. Whether it was guilt, fear, or simply an overwhelming need to tell the truth, she broke her silence in a confidential setting. She didn't claim scandal. She didn't make threats. She simply revealed that during the pregnancy, a private DNA test had been conducted. And the result? Inconclusive. Not negative. Not positive. Just murky. To the average person, the term might sound clinical, a mistake, perhaps, or an administrative fluke. But in the world of royal lineage and billion-dollar legacies, inconclusive is a curse. It opens a box that no one wants to deal with. Was the sample contaminated? Was the father not who they believed he was? Or was there something more deliberate at play? Something engineered? The very idea that Prince Harry, who famously walked away from royal life for the sake of his family, might not be the biological father of his child is more than personal. It strikes at the heart of everything he's built, or rather, everything he gave up. What complicates matters further is that, reportedly, this DNA test was done in secret, without palace involvement, without legal oversight, without even full transparency between the involved parties. This wasn't a court-ordered paternity test. This was private, hidden, and in that secrecy lies the true scandal. Because if a DNA test is done without consent or mutual agreement, who benefits from the results? And more importantly, who benefits from burying them? Sources close to the situation, unnamed, of course, suggest that Meghan Markle was deeply rattled when she learned of the surrogate's disclosure. Some claim she immediately launched into damage control mode, contacting lawyers and publicists in rapid succession. Others say she remained eerily calm, calculating her next move with the poise of someone who's weathered storms before. One insider allegedly described her demeanor as a woman who knew the walls were closing in, but was already building a new room to escape to. At the center of this tornado of emotion and speculation is Prince Harry, a man who, just years ago, was hailed as the most eligible bachelor in the world. A war veteran, a prince, a heartthrob turned husband and father. He's no stranger to controversy, from his youthful missteps to the bombshell Oprah interview that upended the royal narrative. But this is different. This is not a scandal you can walk away from. This is not a tabloid headline you can wave off with a smile. This is biological. It is emotional. It is soul-shaking. There's no way to quantify what it would feel like to discover, or even suspect, that your child might not be yours, especially when your entire world has already been turned upside down in defense of that child, especially when the stakes are not just emotional, but historical. After all, these aren't just any children, they are royalty. Titles, inheritance, public legacy, all hinging on biology. And let's not ignore the optics. If the story proves true, and if the test indeed casts doubt over Prince Harry's paternity, what does that say about the fairy tale the world was sold? What happens when the picture-perfect image of a reformed royal, a California love story, and a new kind of monarchy begins to crack? Already, whispers are turning into questions. Was this an act of betrayal? Was it a medical anomaly? Could Harry have known all along and chosen love over biology? Or is he, like the rest of the world, only just now piecing together a puzzle that was never meant to be solved? Perhaps most disturbing of all is the timing. The surrogate's revelation comes at a moment when the Sussex brand is already under strain. Reports of deals collapsing, a cooling Netflix relationship, and growing distance between Harry and the remaining royals have all painted a picture of instability. Now, add this revelation, not just a question of trust, but of truth. The public is watching. The media is circling. And the royal institution, though quieter than usual, is undoubtedly listening. As we move forward in this story, we will peel back the layers. We'll examine who this surrogate might be, how the test could have come to be, what an inconclusive result actually means, and how this revelation could reshape the narrative of Harry and Meghan's entire relationship. We'll explore the potential fallout, the emotional trauma, and the real-world consequences of a truth too dangerous to whisper, but too big to ignore. Because this isn't just about one man, one woman, or even one child. It's about the stories we're told, the ones we tell ourselves, and the devastating moment when they stop aligning. So stay with us. The truth may be tangled, but in the end, the answers might be simpler and more shocking than anyone imagined. She had no crown, no title, no platform, no public face, just a contract, a code name, and a purpose. Her life, before she agreed to carry what some called royal cargo, had been quiet, predictable, modest. A woman with a medical background and a strong constitution, chosen not because of her fame, but because of her anonymity and her willingness to remain in the shadows. When she was approached, allegedly through an intermediary linked to one of Meghan Markle's most trusted advisors, the terms were precise. Discretion was the cornerstone. There would be no press leaks, no suspicious hospital visits, no lingering looks from paparazzi. Everything had to appear natural, seamless, as if the pregnancy belonged entirely to Meghan and Harry. In exchange, she would be well compensated, not just financially, but with assurances, medical privacy, security protection, legal guarantees, and even a clause that protected her identity from future unmasking. It wasn't just a contract, it was a vow of invisibility. She would carry a child destined for royalty, a life marked by global scrutiny, yet no one would ever know her name. And for a while, she honored every line of that agreement, even when she felt uneasy, even when, behind closed doors, things didn't quite feel right, even when the joy of giving life was overshadowed by the coldness of the operation. From what insiders suggest, her role wasn't one of connection. She wasn't invited into the family dynamic. There were no warm visits from Meghan, no late-night check-ins from Harry. Communication came through intermediaries, doctors, lawyers, and staffers, all of whom reminded her, gently but firmly, of the boundaries of her participation. Emotionally, that detachment wore her down. She had done this once before, for a couple who treated her like a blessing. They held her hand during appointments. They cried together during the first heartbeat. They made her feel like family. This time, it felt transactional, professional, as if she were a vessel, not a person. She didn't complain. She understood the stakes. She reminded herself this was different. Royal. High profile. She told herself to stay focused. But as the months rolled on, her instincts became harder to silence. According to sources close to her, it was around the 7th month that she began to feel something wasn't adding up. There were rumors swirling in the media that she'd heard from friends. Speculation about the Sussex children, whispers of surrogacy, and photos being dissected by online detectives. But what caught her attention most was the sudden increase in medical oversight. She was reportedly asked to visit a specific clinic on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Not her regular OB/GYN, but a facility with private rooms, backdoor entrances, and an entirely different team. There, she underwent several additional tests she hadn't been briefed about. One of them involved collecting samples from both her and, she was told, the supposed father of the child. It wasn't until later, much later, that she found out what those tests were for. In her recounting to a confidant, which was later partially leaked to media insiders, she admitted she had no idea a DNA test had been conducted. At the time, she assumed it was a routine prenatal check, standard for surrogacy cases. But months after the birth, during a conversation with someone she considered a trusted legal ally, she was informed that her pregnancy had included a quietly executed paternity test. When she asked why she had never been told, the answer was cold. "You didn't need to know." That phrase haunted her. It kept her up at night. She had done everything by the book, followed every rule, suppressed every motherly instinct, and remained invisible. And still, she was being kept in the dark about something so personal, so foundational. She began to investigate. What she uncovered shook her to her core. The test, allegedly initiated not by Meghan but by a third party tied to Harry's legal team, had produced a troubling result. It wasn't a clear match. The report didn't confirm paternity, but neither did it deny it. Instead, it returned a classification she had never seen before, inconclusive due to allelic anomalies. She had to Google what it meant. In simplest terms, it meant the DNA comparison didn't produce a definitive match because certain genetic markers either didn't align or were corrupted by unknown variables. This could mean a contaminated sample. It could mean improper testing. Or it could mean something far more sinister, that the man believed to be the father wasn't. She didn't know what to do with this information. For weeks, she said nothing. The child had already been born. Her legal obligations had been fulfilled. The payments were being made as agreed. But the moral unease gnawed at her. Could it be that Prince Harry wasn't the biological father? Could someone else's DNA have been used in the procedure? Or, even worse, could the entire narrative surrounding the birth be built on a carefully constructed lie? At this point, most people would have walked away. They would have cashed the checks, buried the worry, and started a new chapter. But she couldn't. Not just because of the emotional investment, but because she had seen something. Something that made her doubt everything. In the final weeks of the pregnancy, during a routine visit, she claimed to have caught a glimpse of a document, carelessly left on a desk by an assistant rushing between tasks. It was labeled Provisional Declaration of Genetic Consistency. The line for the paternal signature was blank. To her, that wasn't just a clerical error. It was a sign that someone, somewhere, was waiting to finalize something they weren't sure of yet. When she asked about it, she was told, "Don't worry, that's just a placeholder." But the look in the staffer's eyes said otherwise. So she waited. She watched. She followed the news, every mention of the Sussex children, every carefully staged photo release, every inconsistent timeline. And her suspicion grew. Eventually, she confided in a private investigator, someone she knew from a past legal matter, and asked them to discreetly look into the DNA clinic. What they found was unsettling. The lab used for the paternity testing had been acquired, not long after the birth, by a holding company with ties to a legal trust associated with Meghan's legal defense fund. The ownership trail had been wiped clean. To her, this wasn't coincidence. This was cover-up. At this point, her emotional burden became physical. Anxiety, sleeplessness, paranoia. She was constantly looking over her shoulder. Cars parked outside her apartment. voicemails with no sound, a bouquet of roses with no card. She was starting to believe she was being watched. When she finally spoke out, not publicly, but in a secure conversation with a journalist known for protecting sources, she didn't do it for revenge. She did it for peace. I carried their child. I honored every part of that agreement. I kept their secrets. But this wasn't part of the deal. I didn't agree to carry the weight of someone else's lie. Those were her words, recorded, transcribed, and now the center of one of the most potentially devastating royal mysteries of the decade. Her story is just beginning to unfold, and while the world may not know her name, they know her truth, or at least the start of it. The act of conducting a DNA test is, in many ways, an intimate and deeply revealing procedure. It lays bare the very core of human connection, our genetic identity, the invisible threads that tie us to our ancestors and to each other. But when such a test takes place behind closed doors, away from official channels and legal oversight, the implications ripple far beyond science. It becomes a game of trust, secrecy, and power. In the case of the Sussex surrogate, reports indicate that the DNA test was arranged discreetly, carefully shielded from public knowledge and even from some of the key players involved in the surrogacy arrangement. According to insiders, the decision to carry out the test was motivated by growing concerns, questions that no one dared voice openly, but that hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The story begins with a series of medical appointments that appeared routine on the surface, but were anything but ordinary beneath the facade. The surrogate was summoned to an upscale fertility clinic, chosen for its discretion and state-of-the-art technology. This wasn't the clinic that had overseen her prenatal care. It was a different facility, one that specialized in genetic testing and private consultations. On the day of the test, the surrogate was instructed to provide blood and saliva samples, alongside other standard procedures. She was told the purpose was to ensure the health and safety of the baby, a claim that seemed plausible at the time. But later, when she learned about the paternity testing, that explanation rang hollow. What complicates this narrative further is the method of testing and the secrecy surrounding it. Instead of a standard paternity test, which involves simple and well-documented procedures, this one reportedly included multiple rounds of analysis. Each round brought its own results, none of which conclusively matched the expected outcome. The lab technicians, constrained by confidentiality agreements, reportedly shared only limited information, citing patient privacy and legal restrictions. The surrogate later revealed that the test results were delivered in an encrypted file, a PDF protected by a password known only to a select few. This encrypted document was passed along to legal teams, royal aides, and perhaps even to Prince Harry himself, though no official confirmation exists. The term inconclusive on the report carried multiple meanings. Technically, it suggested that the genetic markers tested did not match up in a way that would definitively establish paternity. But it also hinted at anomalies, discrepancies in the alleles tested, possible contamination of samples, or even human error in the laboratory. The medical literature supports that an inconclusive DNA test can arise from several causes. Sample contamination, degraded genetic material, or even mutations can lead to ambiguous results. But in this case, the report's language, according to experts, was unusually vague. It did not specify a clear cause for the inconclusiveness, leaving room for speculation. If contamination or error were responsible, one would expect the test to be redone under strict supervision. Instead, insiders say, the report was shelved, buried deep in legal vaults and whispered conversations. So why was the test conducted in such a secretive manner? Why were the surrogate and possibly other stakeholders kept in the dark? Some legal analysts argue that the decision to conduct the DNA test privately, without palace approval or public transparency, was a strategic move. In a high-profile case like this, a conclusive test, positive or negative, could have catastrophic consequences. Positive results confirming Harry's paternity would solidify the narrative of the Sussex family's authenticity, whereas a negative result could trigger a scandal capable of fracturing the monarchy's image. By keeping the results ambiguous and secret, it allowed all parties involved to maintain plausible deniability. It also created leverage. An inconclusive result is a sword hanging over heads, threatening, but not delivering a fatal blow. For Meghan Markle's camp, such ambiguity could be spun as a protective shield against intrusive questions. For royal aides, it could be a tool to negotiate influence and control behind the scenes. For the surrogate, however, it became a burden of truth that she was not meant to carry. The psychological toll of this secrecy on the surrogate cannot be overstated. Imagine carrying a child destined to be one of the world's most famous, only to learn that the man she was told was the father might not be. Imagine being told to keep silent, while the world projects stories of love, unity, and fairy tale endings. Within the halls of power, whispers circulated. Some aides were reportedly concerned that the inconclusive test could leak to the press and spark a media firestorm. Others believed it was a non-issue, a private matter best handled behind palace walls. But the tension grew. Multiple sources hint at a series of hushed meetings between legal teams and royal representatives, where the DNA test results were the unspoken elephant in the room. The pressure mounted to control the narrative, to keep the story locked down, and to discredit any potential leaks. Interestingly, those closest to Prince Harry suggest he was blindsided by the revelation. If true, this would add a deeply human element to the saga, a man grappling with betrayal, uncertainty, and the fierce need to protect his family. Reports describe him as torn between demanding answers and shielding Meghan from further scrutiny. Experts in royal protocol point out that DNA matters have historically been treated as state secrets. Paternity, lineage, and bloodlines are the invisible currency that underpins monarchy itself. To admit doubt or question paternity openly would be unprecedented, a crack in the crown's foundation. While the public remains unaware of many details, legal experts speculate about the ramifications of such a test. If the DNA results were to be challenged in court, the secrecy around the testing process could undermine their credibility. Chain of custody issues, lack of independent verification, and the involvement of private entities could lead to prolonged legal battles. Moreover, the surrogate's revelations could provide grounds for legal action. If she was not properly informed or consented to the test, or if information was withheld from her, it might constitute a breach of her rights. There is also the question of the children's rights. International laws protect a child's right to know their biological parentage. Should the inconclusive result raise doubts, it could trigger future identity and inheritance disputes. In the meantime, the test's existence and its ambiguous outcome remain a tightly guarded secret. A paradox at the heart of a story where transparency is demanded but obscured. As this chapter closes, one cannot help but wonder, who ultimately decided to order this private test? Was it a skeptical member of Meghan's inner circle? A cautious legal advisor? Or someone with an agenda we have yet to uncover? The answer may lie hidden in the next layers of this unfolding drama. When you're ready, I'll continue with the next chapter. When the news of the inconclusive DNA test reached Meghan Markle's inner circle, sources say the reaction was immediate, intense, and filled with a palpable sense of panic. Unlike previous media storms that could be managed with prepared statements or calculated silence, this revelation struck at the core of the Sussex narrative, a carefully curated story of love, family, and defiance against royal tradition. According to confidential informants close to Meghan, the initial response was one of disbelief. The idea that a private, confidential DNA test had produced ambiguous results was not just unwelcome, it was unthinkable. For someone who has often been described as meticulous in managing her public image, this was a crisis on a personal and professional level. The panic wasn't merely about the test itself. It was about the ripples it would send across the web of relationships and contracts that Meghan had built since stepping into the spotlight. With lucrative deals, charitable foundations, and ongoing media ventures at stake, the potential fallout was enormous. Within hours of the surrogate's disclosure becoming known to a handful of trusted aides, Meghan was reportedly surrounded by a battalion of lawyers, PR strategists, and royal confidants. Damage control plans were swiftly drafted. Messaging was scrutinized and recalibrated. The goal: contain the leak, discredit the source, and regain control of the narrative. One insider described Meghan's demeanor during this period as laser-focused but visibly shaken. While outwardly composed, her private meetings revealed a woman grappling with uncertainty, forced to rethink not only her family's privacy, but the very foundations of her marriage. Reports detail frantic phone calls between Meghan and top-tier legal teams, exploring options ranging from cease and desist orders against the surrogate and media outlets to preemptive statements that could steer public opinion. However, there was a complication. The surrogate story had already begun to circulate in underground media circles, making containment a race against time. Sources indicate that Meghan's team considered several strategies. One involved painting the surrogate as unreliable or motivated by financial greed, a classic tactic to undermine whistleblowers. Another centered on invoking privacy rights, warning of legal repercussions for any further disclosures. Meanwhile, public relations experts were reportedly debating whether Meghan should make a public statement or maintain silence. The risk with speaking out, they warned, was that it would legitimize the allegations and invite further scrutiny. But staying silent might be interpreted as tacit admission. Adding to the pressure was the knowledge that Prince Harry's relationship with the royal family remained strained but potentially on a path toward reconciliation. Any scandal of this magnitude could undermine those fragile ties and derail months of careful diplomacy. At the same time, Meghan was reportedly engaging with media contacts, laying the groundwork for a possible counter-narrative. Some insiders suggest she contemplated a controlled reveal, a carefully framed interview to shift sympathy back in her favor. The plan, however, was complicated by the unpredictable nature of leaks and the surrogate's own willingness to speak. Behind closed doors, conversations about secrecy and loyalty dominated. Staffers were warned of confidentiality breaches. Surveillance measures, both digital and physical, were allegedly ramped up. Phones were monitored, messages encrypted, and social media activity analyzed for suspicious behavior. This level of paranoia is not uncommon in high-stakes situations, but it is telling of the gravity Meghan perceived in the threat. According to several former aides who spoke anonymously, the atmosphere around her camp during this period was tense, guarded, and at times fractious. One former staff member recalled an instance where a leaked message about the DNA test caused a flurry of emergency meetings. It was as if the whole world was closing in at once. Everyone knew this wasn't just another tabloid story. This was personal, and it could change everything. Despite the efforts, whispers about the DNA test found their way into social media forums, conspiracy groups, and tabloid rumor mills. Each new leak added fuel to a growing fire, making containment increasingly difficult. Meghan's public appearances during this time were scrutinized for signs of stress. Observers noted fleeting moments of tension, guarded smiles, and a refusal to engage with press questions about her family. While she maintained her poise in public, the pressure behind the scenes was mounting. Meanwhile, the narrative battle extended into legal realms. Meghan's lawyers reportedly prepared cease and desist letters targeting outlets publishing the surrogate story, warning of defamation claims and breaches of privacy laws. However, legal experts noted that the surrogate's anonymity complicated efforts to silence her effectively. At the heart of the storm was Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry. The DNA test's ambiguous results posed not only a public relations nightmare, but a deeply private dilemma. Some insiders claim Meghan leaned on Harry heavily during this period, seeking reassurance and support. However, other sources suggest fissures appeared. The strain of secrecy and the emotional weight of the test results reportedly caused tension between them. Was Harry willing to accept ambiguity? Did Meghan fear that he might demand answers she was not prepared to give? The exact nature of their private conversations remains unknown, but what is clear is that this revelation rocked the foundation of their union, even if only temporarily. In this chaotic period, Meghan was also reportedly engaging with trusted advisors on crafting a longer-term strategy, one that could involve preemptive storytelling, philanthropic announcements, and media appearances designed to shift focus away from controversy and back to positive narratives. Despite all these efforts, the shadow of the DNA test loomed large. It introduced uncertainty into a world that had thrived on controlled messaging and image crafting. As this chapter closes, it becomes clear that Meghan's alleged panic was not just about managing a scandal. It was about confronting a truth that no amount of spin or legal maneuvering could easily erase. The question remains, how far will she go to protect her family's image? And what price will be paid for the silence that follows? Prince Harry's journey from a beloved royal son to a fiercely protective father and husband has been marked by courage, controversy, and an unyielding desire to forge his own path. Yet, beneath the public persona of a man who traded crowns for freedom lies a deeply human story, one filled with hopes, fears, and the aching need for certainty in his family life. The revelation of an inconclusive DNA test, reportedly linked to his own children, struck Harry with a force that no amount of royal training could have prepared him for. To understand the depth of Harry's turmoil, one must first consider the emotional weight he carries. Losing his mother, Princess Diana, at a young age left a void that no title or privilege could fill. His determination to be a present and loving father emerged not just from personal conviction, but from a desire to break cycles of pain and secrecy. Each moment with his children became a chance at redemption, at healing the wounds of the past. So, when whispers began circulating about a private DNA test, and worse, that the results were inconclusive, the blow was not merely biological, it was existential. What does it mean to be a father if the very foundation of that role is called into question? How does a man reconcile the love he feels with uncertainty about genetic ties? Insiders close to Harry describe him grappling with these questions in profound silence. Unlike Meghan, who allegedly went into immediate damage control, Harry reportedly withdrew, wrestling internally with disbelief and confusion. Those who have spoken to him say his usual candor was replaced by guardedness, a reluctance to discuss the matter openly even with close friends. One confidant described him as a man caught between worlds, the prince he was born to be and the father he desperately wants to be. The inconclusive test, they said, struck at the very heart of this conflict. Moreover, the implications were complicated by the very public nature of his life. Unlike most fathers who might face such doubts in private, Harry's struggle was set against the unforgiving backdrop of global media scrutiny. Every move, every expression, every whispered conversation risked being dissected and sensationalized. Yet, some reports suggest Harry did not immediately confront Meghan about the test. Instead, he sought answers quietly, consulting trusted advisors, medical experts, and legal counsel to understand what the inconclusive result really meant. Was it an error? A technical glitch? Or was there something more? In these private moments, the narrative of love and loyalty was tested. Harry, known for his fierce protection of family, faced a dilemma. Should he push for the truth at all costs, or shield his wife and children from potential fallout? Sources indicate that this internal struggle created tension within the couple's relationship. Harry's desire for clarity reportedly clashed with Meghan's preference for discretion and control over the narrative. These conflicting impulses deepened existing fissures. At the same time, Harry's sense of identity as a father was challenged not only by biology, but by the symbolic weight of fatherhood in royal tradition. Bloodlines have always mattered in monarchy. They determine succession, titles, and legacy. To question paternity is to question belonging, inheritance, and future. Some royal experts speculate that Harry's emotional turmoil was compounded by his ongoing efforts to distance himself from the institution that had shaped him. Walking away from royal duties and privileges was a statement of independence. But this revelation pulled him back into the complicated web of lineage and legitimacy he thought he had escaped. The inconclusive DNA result also posed practical questions. Would Harry seek a retest? Would he demand transparency from Meghan and her team? Or would he accept ambiguity in the name of family unity? According to a source close to Harry, he was torn. On one hand, the love for his children and wife compelled him to protect their privacy and avoid scandal. On the other, the human need for certainty gnawed at him. Some close to Harry suggest he reached a breaking point, experiencing moments of emotional vulnerability rarely seen in public. There are reports of long nights spent in reflection, conversations with his brother William and other family members growing tense, and private consultations with counselors to navigate the storm. The burden of secrecy, it seems, weighed heavily on Harry. Friends describe him as conflicted, a man longing for peace but caught in a web of suspicion and silence. In this chapter of his life, Harry is no longer just a prince or a public figure. He is a man confronting profound questions about love, trust, and the meaning of family. The inconclusive test is not just a medical anomaly. It is a catalyst forcing him to redefine his identity. Yet, despite the turmoil, Harry's commitment to his children remains unwavering. Whether or not the DNA test confirms biological ties, he has expressed a fierce, unshakable devotion to their well-being. As this chapter closes, the question lingers. Can love alone sustain a family when the certainty of blood is in doubt? For Prince Harry, the answer may still be unfolding. In the sprawling, centuries-old institution that is the British monarchy, silence is rarely accidental. When whispers of a potential scandal reach its inner chambers, especially one as explosive as doubts surrounding the paternity of Prince Harry's children, the palace does not rush to confirm or deny. Instead, it adopts a strategic distance, a calculated silence designed to contain damage and preserve the image of stability that the monarchy depends on. The revelation of an inconclusive DNA test involving Prince Harry's offspring placed the palace in an unprecedented position. For generations, royal paternity has been a subject of quiet assumption, rarely questioned openly. To acknowledge doubts openly would have been to invite chaos into the carefully maintained order of succession and legitimacy. Initial palace responses were characterized by tight-lipped statements, a refusal to engage with the rumors swirling in the press. Royal spokespersons issued standard lines about privacy and family matters, emphasizing that personal issues would not be addressed in the media. This official reticence sent a clear message. This was not a topic for public debate. However, behind the polished walls of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, the situation was far from dormant. According to several palace insiders who spoke on condition of anonymity, the palace hierarchy was in crisis mode, orchestrating a response designed to keep the matter contained without fueling speculation. One key strategy involved reinforcing the loyalty of those within the palace who remained close to Harry and Meghan. Courtiers and aides were instructed to avoid public comment and to discourage staff from leaking information. The palace's legal teams were reportedly put on alert, preparing for potential litigation should the surrogate or media outlets press the issue further. Some insiders suggest that King Charles himself was briefed on the matter early on. Known for his preference for discretion and measured responses, Charles is said to have advised patience, allowing the issue to fade quietly without public confrontation. This approach aligns with his long-standing strategy of protecting the monarchy from scandals that could distract from his reign. Prince William's reaction, however, is less documented and subject to speculation. While William is often seen as the custodian of traditional royal values, some sources hint at private frustration over the situation, particularly given his strained relationship with Harry. Yet, in public and behind closed doors, William remained measured, choosing to focus on his own family and duties. The palace's calculated silence also extended to its interactions with the media. Relationships with certain journalists were tightened, with preferred outlets given exclusive stories designed to shift attention away from the paternity rumors. Simultaneously, the palace was believed to be monitoring social media closely, identifying potential leaks and misinformation. This dual approach of selective engagement and monitoring underscores a broader strategy: control the narrative without acknowledging the scandal. The hope was that by not giving the rumors legitimacy, they would lose momentum. But the palace faced a delicate balance. Too much silence risked feeding conspiracy theories and eroding public trust. Too much acknowledgement could have fueled the fire, encouraging more disclosures and damaging the monarchy's reputation. Interestingly, some palace aides expressed concern internally about the collateral damage of this silence. They worried about the emotional toll on Harry, Meghan, and their children, trapped between private uncertainty and public scrutiny. There were also fears that the ongoing media frenzy could overshadow other royal initiatives and public engagements, complicating the monarchy's efforts to modernize and maintain relevance in a rapidly changing world. Adding to the complexity was the possibility that the palace might be preparing contingency plans. These could include quietly facilitating a DNA retest under official supervision or negotiating terms with Meghan and Harry to manage the fallout should the results become public. Yet, as of now, no such actions have been confirmed. The palace's official position remains one of respectful non-interference in what is deemed a private family matter. Public opinion is divided. Loyalists argue that the monarchy's hands are tied and that privacy must be respected, while critics accuse the institution of evasiveness and lack of transparency. Social media platforms buzz with speculation, memes, and heated debates. For the palace, every day the story remains unresolved is another day of quiet tension. The longer the inconclusive DNA test remains a secret or an unanswered question, the more challenging it becomes to manage both internal and external pressures. In this arena of power, tradition, and secrecy, the royal family is faced with a dilemma: maintain their historic code of silence and risk public distrust, or break it and open the floodgates to scrutiny that could threaten their very foundation. As this chapter draws to a close, one thing is clear: the palace's silence is not absence. It is strategy, and strategy, in the royal world, often speaks louder than words. When the first hints of the Surrogate's revelation began to circulate, the media response was swift and unrelenting. In an age dominated by instantaneous information and relentless social scrutiny, a story as juicy as an inconclusive DNA test involving Prince Harry's children was bound to ignite a wildfire of speculation, accusation, and drama. Initially, the news was confined to underground forums, whispers among tabloid insiders, and encrypted messages shared by anonymous sources. Yet, the tantalizing nature of the story, a secret DNA test hidden from the public, a surrogate breaking silence, and the possibility that Prince Harry might not be the biological father, quickly captivated journalists hungry for exclusives and audiences craving scandal. Major tabloids and gossip columns scrambled to verify the claim. Some outlets ran with the story cautiously, hedging their reports with phrases like unconfirmed sources and alleged revelations, mindful of the legal risks and the powerful parties involved. Others seized the moment to publish sensational headlines that sold papers but also risked inflaming an already volatile situation. Behind the scenes, Meghan Markle's legal team sprang into action, issuing stern warnings and cease and desist letters to any outlets that dared to name the surrogate or speculate too aggressively. The legal threats were designed to slow the tide of leaks, but in the digital age, such tactics often serve only to fan the flames. One of the most intriguing aspects of the media storm was the sudden appearance and disappearance of articles related to the surrogate's claims. Reports emerged that certain stories were quickly scrubbed from websites, tweets were deleted, and video segments pulled from streaming platforms. This digital redaction fueled speculation of coordinated efforts to suppress damaging information. Social media became a battleground. On one side were ardent supporters of the Sussexes, dismissing the story as a malicious attack orchestrated by royalists or tabloid conspirators intent on ruining lives. On the other side, skeptics and truth-seekers dug through inconsistencies in official timelines, scrutinized photos and videos, and pieced together timelines that some argued revealed contradictions. The role of influencers and celebrity commentators added layers of complexity. Some weighed in with conspiracy theories that bordered on the outlandish, while others urged caution, reminding followers that the stakes involved real people and real emotions. Amidst the cacophony, some journalists attempted investigative work, reaching out to medical experts, fertility clinics, and anonymous insiders. While official responses remained tight-lipped, off-the-record conversations hinted at fractured relationships and growing distrust within Meghan's circle. One particularly notable leak suggested that the surrogate's decision to speak out was influenced by frustration with the silence and secrecy imposed upon her. Sources close to her indicated feelings of isolation, fear, and a desire to reclaim agency in a story that had rendered her invisible. The media frenzy also triggered intense speculation about the potential involvement of third parties, legal advisors, fertility specialists, even palace officials, in shaping the narrative or manipulating information. Rumors swirled about encrypted files, secret recordings, and confidential meetings held far from prying eyes. At times, the coverage verged on intrusive, with reporters staking out known associates, attempting to capture candid comments or sightings. This invasive approach raised ethical questions about privacy, especially considering the involvement of children too young to defend themselves. Public reactions reflected the polarized nature of the story. Some viewers expressed empathy for the surrogate, praising her courage in speaking out. Others condemned her, accusing her of betrayal or financial motivation. Online communities erupted in heated debates about loyalty, truth, and the price of secrecy. Throughout this media maelstrom, the Sussex camp maintained a near silence publicly, opting instead for behind-the-scenes maneuvers to manage the fallout. This strategic quietude, however, sometimes backfired, allowing rumors to fill the void and narratives to spin unchecked. The saga revealed the power and peril of modern media in shaping public perception. In an era where stories spread faster than facts can be verified, the line between truth and speculation becomes dangerously blurred. As the media storm raged, one thing was undeniable. The surrogate's revelation had transformed from a whispered secret into a global sensation, one with ramifications that extended far beyond the headlines. And yet, despite the frenzy, many essential questions remained unanswered, tucked away behind layers of legal warnings, confidential agreements, and guarded silence. As this chapter closes, the media's role in both exposing and complicating the story is unmistakable. The firestorm they ignited may be impossible to fully control, and its aftermath is only beginning to unfold. As the surrogate's revelation echoed across media outlets and social platforms, an explosion of theories emerged, each more elaborate, more conspiratorial than the last. The internet, that vast arena of information and misinformation, quickly became a battleground where truth and fiction tangled in an endless war. For the story of Prince Harry's inconclusive DNA test, this meant that no stone was left unturned and no possibility too outrageous to explore. Among the most widely circulated theories was the claim that the entire narrative had been engineered as a strategic setup, a calculated leak intended to destabilize the Sussex brand. Proponents of this view pointed to the timing of the revelation, which coincided with reports of dwindling deals, internal family tensions, and public relations challenges faced by Meghan and Harry. According to this theory, rivals within the royal establishment or opposing media factions sought to weaponize the DNA test as leverage. By planting doubts about paternity, they aimed to undermine Harry's credibility and force Meghan and Harry further into isolation, thereby fracturing their ability to operate independently from the monarchy. Others argued that the surrogate herself might be a pawn, manipulated into speaking out by outside forces seeking to exploit personal information for political or financial gain. Supporters of Meghan and Harry often painted the surrogate as vulnerable, caught in a maelstrom far beyond her control. Simultaneously, a subset of commentators posited more speculative theories involving fertility treatments and donor sperm. Some claimed Meghan might have used anonymous donors, whether by choice or necessity, during surrogacy or assisted reproduction. This, they argued, could explain the inconclusive results without implicating deception or betrayal. Such claims sparked heated debate. Medical experts weighed in, explaining that assisted reproductive technologies often involve complex procedures that can produce unexpected genetic outcomes. Yet, they cautioned against jumping to conclusions without comprehensive evidence. Another popular theory suggested that the inconclusive result was the product of deliberate tampering, either by the laboratory performing the test or by interested parties aiming to obscure the truth. Conspiracy forums buzzed with claims of altered samples, hidden DNA profiles, and clandestine deals. Amid these swirling speculations, some voices called for caution, warning that unfounded theories could cause irreparable harm to the individuals involved, especially the children at the center of the controversy. They urged a focus on verified facts and respect for privacy. On social media platforms, these theories ignited passionate discussions. Hashtags related to the scandal trended globally, while fan groups and detractors clashed over loyalty, truth, and the ethics of publicizing such intimate matters. The flood of theories also spilled into mainstream media. Panel discussions, podcasts, and televised debates dissected every angle, often blurring the lines between analysis and sensationalism. Some commentators questioned whether the focus on DNA and paternity was itself a distraction from larger issues facing the Sussexes and the monarchy. Behind the scenes, legal and PR experts reportedly monitored the public reaction closely. The proliferation of conspiracy theories complicated efforts to craft a coherent response and added pressure on Meghan and Harry to address the rumors directly. Amidst the speculation, one truth emerged clearly. The story had transcended private family matters and become a cultural phenomenon reflecting broader anxieties about identity, trust, and the power of secrets in a hyper-connected world. For the surrogate, who initiated this chain of events, the theories were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they elevated her voice and forced attention on the inconclusive test. On the other, they exposed her to public scrutiny, harassment, and potential legal threats. This maelstrom raised questions about motivation. Was the surrogate seeking justice, peace of mind, or financial compensation? Or was she simply overwhelmed by the burden of silence and secrecy? In the end, the internet's sprawling conjectures highlight a universal human response to uncertainty. The need to fill gaps in knowledge with stories that make sense of chaos. Whether those stories are grounded in reality or fantasy, they reveal deep-seated fears and hopes projected onto a royal saga. As this chapter ends, it becomes clear that separating truth from setup is a challenge for everyone involved: royals, media, and the public alike. The only certainty is that the story has entered a new phase, one where narratives compete for dominance in an ever-shifting landscape. Royal history is riddled with whispers and rumors of secret bloodlines, disputed paternities, and hidden scandals. While the British monarchy projects an image of unbroken lineage and steadfast tradition, beneath the polished surface lies a complex tapestry of human frailty, political maneuvering, and, at times, deliberate concealment. The story of an inconclusive DNA test linked to Prince Harry's children is not unprecedented when placed within this larger historical context. Monarchies across Europe and beyond have grappled with questions of legitimacy that threatened not only individual reputations, but entire dynasties. One of the most infamous examples is the case of King Henry VIII, whose desperate search for a male heir led to a series of marriages, annulments, and, ultimately, religious upheaval. Rumors surrounding the paternity of his children, particularly those born to Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, fueled political plots and shaped the course of English history. Centuries later, whispers about the legitimacy of Queen Victoria's descendants occasionally surfaced, especially when illnesses such as hemophilia spread through royal bloodlines, sparking speculation about hidden genetic factors and surrogacy practices. In more recent times, stories of alleged extramarital affairs and questionable paternities have surfaced within royal families, though often suppressed by protocol and discretion. These tales, whether true or fabricated, remind us that royal bloodlines are not immune to the complexities of human relationships. What makes the Sussex surrogacy story unique is the modern tool of DNA testing, a technology that can confirm or deny lineage with scientific certainty. Yet, paradoxically, even with advances in genetics, royal paternity remains shrouded in secrecy, partially due to the institution's need to control the narrative. The inconclusive DNA test at the heart of this current saga echoes a historical pattern. When facts threaten established narratives, ambiguity and silence often prevail. Historians note that monarchies have long employed various means to preserve legitimacy, from arranged marriages to official proclamations, and at times, to strategic cover-ups. Bloodlines were carefully guarded, and any hint of illegitimacy was quickly quelled to maintain public confidence. Royal advisors, courtiers, and even medical practitioners played roles in managing perceptions. In the age before DNA testing, paternity was largely a matter of appearance and acceptance rather than proof. The introduction of genetic science has both empowered and endangered royal institutions. While it offers undeniable evidence, it also poses risks that monarchies may not be prepared to face publicly. In the Sussex case, the inconclusive test is a modern manifestation of age-old anxieties about blood, inheritance, and power. It highlights how even today, the idea of pure royal blood carries weight, socially, politically, and emotionally. Furthermore, the story invites reflection on how notions of legitimacy have evolved. Whereas once royal blood defined one's right to rule, contemporary values emphasize personal choice, love, and family bonds beyond genetics. Yet, despite progress, The symbolic importance of bloodlines endures, especially within institutions like the British monarchy that are steeped in tradition. Legal scholars also observe that disputed paternity in royal contexts can have profound implications, not just for inheritance rights, but for the constitutional order itself. Changes in succession laws or the recognition of heirs can ripple through governance and national identity. The Sussex controversy, therefore, is not merely a personal matter, but one with potential historical and political consequences. This chapter's historical lens reveals that the current scandal is part of a long lineage of royal challenges related to identity and legitimacy. It underscores the tension between private realities and public expectations that royal families have navigated for centuries. As the narrative unfolds, this history serves as a reminder that behind the grandeur and ceremony, the monarchy is a human institution, vulnerable to the same doubts and dramas that affect all families. In the high-stakes world of royal secrets and surrogacy agreements, legal instruments are often the invisible weapons that shape narratives, silence dissent, and protect reputations. The story of the inconclusive DNA test involving Prince Harry's children is no exception. Behind the headlines and whispers lies a complex web of contracts, confidentiality agreements, and legal maneuvers designed to control information and to keep the surrogate's voice muted. At the heart of this legal landscape are non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, which the surrogate allegedly signed before, during, and after the pregnancy. These contracts are common in surrogacy arrangements, but take on heightened significance when the child in question is tied to one of the most famous couples in the world. The NDAs likely prohibit her from revealing any details about the pregnancy, the child, or any related medical procedures. However, sources close to the surrogate suggest that she felt increasingly trapped by these agreements. The pressure to maintain silence was immense, compounded by what she perceived as a growing disconnect between the reality she lived and the story being presented to the public. For someone who had carried a child destined for royalty, the weight of secrecy became unbearable. Legal experts explain that violating an NDA can lead to severe consequences, including lawsuits for damages, injunctions to prevent further disclosures, and even criminal penalties in some jurisdictions. For the surrogate, breaking silence was not just a moral choice, but a calculated risk, one that could have financial and personal repercussions. In addition to NDAs, reports indicate that gag orders may have been employed. These court-issued orders restrict parties from discussing specific information publicly, often used to protect privacy in sensitive cases. If a gag order was placed on the surrogate, it would severely limit her ability to share her story without risking contempt of court. Complicating matters further are the alleged threats of defamation suits from Meghan and Harry's legal team aimed at media outlets publishing the surrogate's claims. Defamation law requires proof that statements are false and damaging to reputation. But in cases involving anonymous sources and confidential contracts, the legal battles become protracted and complex. The surrogate's legal position is precarious. While she may have legitimate grievances about being kept in the dark or pressured into silence, the enforceability of NDAs and gag orders could silence her regardless. This legal chokehold serves as a powerful deterrent against leaks, but also raises ethical questions about the rights of surrogates and the limits of confidentiality. Behind the scenes, the surrogate is said to have consulted with lawyers sympathetic to her situation, exploring ways to protect herself while challenging restrictive agreements. Such legal consultations are delicate, as any misstep could trigger retaliatory actions. Some human rights advocates argue that NDAs and gag orders in surrogacy arrangements, especially involving public figures, should be scrutinized for their potential to suppress truth and silence vulnerable parties. They contend that transparency and informed consent are paramount, particularly when medical and genetic information is involved. The legal battles extend beyond contracts to consider the rights of the children born from surrogacy. International conventions emphasize the child's right to know their biological origins, a principle that could conflict with efforts to maintain secrecy in royal contexts. If the inconclusive DNA test ever became the subject of legal inquiry, courts would likely examine the chain of custody of samples, the procedures followed in testing, and the consent given by all parties involved. Any irregularities could jeopardize the validity of results and complicate custody or inheritance claims. Additionally, the surrogate's identity and well-being are at risk. Whistleblowers in such high-profile cases often face harassment, legal intimidation, and public backlash. Protective measures, such as anonymity, witness protection, or relocation, might be necessary but challenging to implement given media scrutiny. As this chapter unfolds, the intersection of law, privacy, and power becomes starkly visible. Legal instruments designed to safeguard secrets also imprison truth and complicate the lives of those caught in their grip. The surrogate's courage in speaking out against these constraints reveals the human cost behind legal battles waged in silence. It also exposes the fragile balance between protecting privacy and upholding justice. In the realm of royalty and surrogacy, law is not merely a set of rules. It is a tool wielded to shape realities, silence inconvenient truths, and preserve legacies.